Hey there, in this video I'm going to show you a nifty little trick for creating and saving sounds on the Texture Lab. So the way I think about the Texture Lab is it really is a lab for creating various sounds and textures. You can take a sample of just about anything, even something that's not musical. For example,
Hola.
here I've sampled my girlfriend's baby cousin saying hola, and if I mess around with the knobs a bit, let's turn the blend on the granular all the way up, let's turn up some reverb, let's slow everything down, turn up the density, let's turn down the size, and let's decrease the length of this a bit, and make sure the shimmer is off, and let's go down an octave, and I've created something in between a chorus and a pad, and could make it even more pad-like by increasing the attack. And you get the idea. Alternatively, I could make a few other adjustments. Turn the speed back up, blend back down, turn the reverb off, and let's hold that note
Hola. Hola.
and decrease the length. And now I've turned the poor kid into a synthesizer. And there are all sorts of things I could do in between. Now, the question then becomes, okay, we're generating all these different variations of our original sample, and that's fun and all, but what do we actually do with them? This is a question I often had when I was working with the Texture Lab, and I really wanted a better way of exploring sounds and then saving them so that I can actually use them later for songs, to use either as instruments or as just kind of ambient textures. And I figured something out, and that is what I'm going to show you today. So we could keep going with that silly sample of my girlfriend's baby cousin, but it's going to be a lot more pleasant to listen to if we sample something musical. So I went ahead and created another sample with this kalimba I have right here. These are very fun to play around with and sample, by the way, and this is like literally the dirt cheapest kalimba you can buy on Amazon. I think I got it for like 18 euros or something. I'm American, but I live in Europe. It just has a very sweet sound to it. By the way, if you're wondering what this is and or why is it wearing a Russian hat, well, it's an H4n Pro. It's the microphone I use for sampling, and it's also the microphone that I'm using for recording this video, and the hat is a little windscreen that is preventing you from hearing all of my horrible breathing. Alright, so got my sample. And now here's what I'm going to do with it. So I'm just going to completely neutralize it. And the thing to keep in mind here is that by default, if you're in an empty pattern, which I am right now, the Texture Lab is going to apply a little bit of reverb and shimmer to your sample. So if we punch that up, you can really hear that. And if we turn it all the way down, now we have both the reverb and the shimmer off. And we're almost at our dry sample, except the blend is going to be at about the midway point by default. So let's turn that off as well. Now we have our dry sample. Okay, so here's the next thing that I'm going to do. So first up, I'm going to decide on how many steps I want to have, and you could just do 16 here, but I'm going to challenge myself by going up to 32, although you could go crazy here and go all the way up to 128 if you really wanted to. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit record, and I'm just going to play the neutral C key, the middle C, so that we get our original sample, and it's not pitched up and it's not pitched down. It's just our dry sample. And I'm going to record that dry sample onto each one of the steps. And if you have auto step on, this is really easy since you just automatically go to the next step, and then you can just punch in the sample like this. By the way, you have to do it with this rhythm. The Sonicware Corporation legally mandates it. I'm just joking, but it does make this kind of boring process more fun. All right, there we go. Oh, and actually I just heard something that brings up a good point. So let's go back to this step. Did you hear how there was a little bit of noise at the end of there? I think it was me moving around the microphone. Before you put your sample in the step, I would make sure that you cut things out like that, like get your sample in as perfect of a condition as it can be. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to clear all those notes, and let's reduce the length of the sample, and let's hold that note. There we go. Okay, now let's try that again. Okay, so we've got our sample on the steps, and now here comes step 2. Very, very important here. It's not going to work if you don't do this. You're going to go function and then the parameter lock button. It's going to turn red, and that means you are in parameter recording, meaning that if you go to any one of these steps and change the parameters, those changes are going to be recorded onto that step. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm in recording mode, just going to play this step, and I'm going to mess around with it until I get a sound I like. Okay, I think that sounds nice. Now I'm just going to go on to the next step and do the same thing. Okay, now I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to challenge myself here and try to get to step 32 and see how many sounds can I come up with using this method. And let's see how long this takes me. So my clock currently says 10:08 a.m., which is not the correct time at all. I think the electricity died recently, and I never bothered to reset it. But anyway, let's see how long this takes me. Okay, I'm done. It's now 10:27, so that was what, like 18, 19 minutes? I don't know, I'm not very good at math. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get out of parameter lock, and let's just save this pattern. And now what I'm going to do is this. I am going to select stutter so that we are in stutter mode. And then here is how it's going to work. So when I press play, we're going to cycle through all of my various sounds that I've created, and it's not going to sound that great. However, thanks to the fact that we have stutter on, what we can now do is this. When we press play, we can go to a particular step, park ourselves there, exit play, and now whatever parameter changes we had on the last step that we were on will still be there on the Texture Lab when we play the keyboard. Which means that we now have access to all 32 of these sounds with just a couple button presses. So let's go to number 3. I have no memory of what I did here. Let's try number 1. Let's see what else I did. So let's try 16. Lucky number 13. Go on to the second page. Let's go to 16 plus 2 would be 18. 8 plus 16, that would be 24. Now, are these all going to be award-winning sounds? No. But there are some pretty cool textures mixed in here. anyway, you get the idea. And so that was 32 sounds that I created out of one sample. And the Texture Lab has spots for 32 samples. So you do the math here. 32 times 32 is, I think, a little bit over 1,000. So in theory, you could pretty easily create more than 1,000 sounds just using 32 samples. And in theory, you could do way more than that since there are 128 steps per pattern. So yeah, lots of room for exploration here. And best of all, after you've finished exploring, you can go back and use one of your sounds or textures in an actual composition. Now, before I close out here, a few loose ends to tie up. So first of all, if we just run through the pattern, well, it doesn't sound that terrible, but it's also not that great. However, something that we can do here is we can turn down the speed of our pattern. Slow it down even more by changing the note value to something smaller. Let's go all the way down to quarter notes. Okay, now we can transition from one sound to another much more slowly. And another thing that we can do here is, I think it's nice to leave the notes on the steps so that we have sort of a little preview of it when we press play and then go to a step. Oh, I don't remember that one. What does that sound like? That's kind of nice. Anyway, it's nice to have a little preview, but we can also just clear it out by going clear pattern and then select note instead of all. And selecting note will get rid of all of the notes on the step, but our parameter changes will still be saved to each step. So if I go to number 5, for example, that brings us to that sound. Now what we can do is we can turn on the pattern and just start playing something, and it will shift from one sound to the next, which will sometimes lead to some weird results because some of these sounds are pretty clashing. With that in mind, another thing that we can do here is we can press play, and then with stutter still on, we can select a couple of steps like this. And if you see the flashing lights, they're just shifting now back and forth. And so we can experiment with this and find a pair or even a trio or a quartet, I guess, and maybe a quintet. See if I can actually do that with my thumb. No, it's too hard. But anyway, you can hold down different steps and sort of toggle back and forth between them and see if you can get something cool that way. So this just takes some trial and error and experimentation. Let's see what we can do here. Okay, I think that last one was kind of cool. And I guess more importantly, it's also just something that I would never in a million years come up with if left completely to my own devices. And again, does that make a whole song in and of itself? No, but oftentimes that's not the point of the Texture Lab. The Texture Lab is, as the name implies, designed to create textures, which can then be integrated into larger compositions. And I hope to do some videos on that at a future point. Anyway, 2 more little loose ends to tie up here before I close off. So the first one is this. Let's go back into recording mode and let's put our note back into the steps. So neutral C. Let's say we are still designing our sound and we want to test how something actually sounds when we play it on the keyboard. Well, to do that, you can just do the same technique as we did before. Exit recording, hit the play button, and then go to the step that you want with stutter mode turned on, and now you can preview how it's going to sound if you play it melodically or in chords or whatever. One last thing to keep in mind here is that there are certain settings that are not going to be saved as parameter changes to steps. So for example, if I change the mode from poly to legato, which can often lead to some cool results, especially if you put some glide on between the notes. So let's do that with, I don't know, number 9 or 12. The important thing to keep in mind here is just that every single step is now going to be getting played in legato mode, so we have to switch back and forth between different modes manually, and I would encourage you to experiment with these because sometimes things can sound much cooler in one mode than another. For example, you might get some cool results in arpeggio mode. Turn up the speed here. Let's try a different sound. If you want to further mess with some of these settings, you can exit parameter recording, go back into parameter lock, and now you can mess around with these, but your original settings will still be saved to the pattern. This way, if I'm in like an arpeggio and I want to mess around with the release, I can do that without worrying about ruining my original sound. Alright, I think that about does it, although I'm sure that the moment I turn off the camera, I'll remember one thing that I wanted to mention and forgot, but that's how it always is. Anyway, if you liked this video, please consider subscribing and or liking the video. I have a lot more videos on the Texture Lab, which I will put in the video description below, and some of those videos go into the various techniques I was using as I was designing these sounds, as well as some techniques I use when I am sampling instruments. Check those out if you are interested, and in any case, I hope you have a great day, and I hope to see you again soon on this channel. In the meantime, wish you all the best in your musical adventures, and goodbye for now.